Good morning and welcome to this week's recruitment webinar with Jump. And this week we're talking about Q4 performance maximization, turning your final quarter into your strongest quarter. So to me, sometimes this isn't rocket science. However, there's lots of little subtle things that need to be applied and need to be done to ensure that Q4 does become a really strong quarter. Before we start, Dave, I've got some stats. You're going to love this.
Back to stats. I like that.
Back to stats, but we're going to go back into stats for there. But it's just for this week for a stat, because I read a stat and I thought it was really interesting. I was at a team event last week and someone presenting came out with a stat that 22% of candidates in 2025 didn't start the job that they were offered, and 46% of people kept on interviewing after being offered a job. So I thought I'd investigate, see where this stat came from, what's that, etc., etc. So I like to fact check, as you know, and I'm sure Donald Trump likes to fact check his facts. So I was fact checking away, and this is what I found. I couldn't find that stat anywhere. So I'm not saying it's untrue, etc., but I found a stat that was very true that came from Gartner. And Gartner's HR research in the June 2022 survey found that 44% of 3,600 respondents backed out after accepting an offer, compared to 36% in 2019. Now, if you go back to 2022-23, there was a massive counter-offer stage going on all the time. Okay, the analysts also found that only 59% of people who had recently accepted a job said they would make the same choice again, and candidates who reported that they would repeat an offer decision only peaked at 83%. So what it says that people are very unsure, even after they've accepted a job, whether they should actually keep working that role and stay within that role. The survey also found that half the surveyed candidates said they were still open to offers, while only 28% said that if they had to make the decision again, they would stay at their previous employer.
And what percent would stay at their previous?
28%. So it says there's lots of uncertainty in the candidate marketplace with what's going on still, okay? And so we need to look at that. So as with a dead duo this week, Dave, okay, let's jump straight in. I'm sure some of those facts will massively affect how 2025 finishes and how we start 2026. But more importantly, something about candidate control must be sort of taken on board there. So let's jump into the questions. Okay, first question. What's the biggest or the single biggest psychological mistake you see recruitment leaders make when trying to accelerate their pipeline in Q4?
And this is something for me which I have held true for probably 25 years. And it's assuming that you have to end Q4 on the 31st of December or the end of the year. Everything runs to the end of the year, and then either business falls off a cliff or you have to start all over again. Every single incentive I've done since I've learned this, and every single encouragement I give with the clients I work with, is if you are pushing for something, a drive for 25 or whatever title you may do, run it to the second or third week of January. Because it doesn't matter if it's temp numbers or perm starters, everything seems to sometimes trickle away towards the end of the year. And we all know January is just another month. We have some time off in December. But if you can keep your competitions and your incentives and your motivation of your staff, run it through to the middle of January, even the end of January, psychologically, that improves performance. And I've seen it in so many companies how their performance is improved by doing that.
It's interesting, isn't it? I'm going to sort of use that, but I use that similar analogy, but in a question later on, where, I don't think the end of the year is a destination. It's just a stop on the travel that you're on, and why treat it as a destination? But we'll come back to that bit. When I wrote the question, obviously, I started to think about the answers and what's going on, and I started to sort of come up with quite a lot of things that I thought were psychological sort of mistakes that recruitment leaders make. And I think one of them was always doing the same thing, but doing more of it is going to make a massive difference. And so you've got to think about that definition of madness, doing the same things over and over again and thinking you get different results. You have to change certain things to actually change your results. Okay. And the other one that I came across, that the only area that needs developing is new business development, which is rubbish. It's all about you. Just think about that, developing your candidate control. Yeah, if you developed your candidate control, how much more would you do? And then I thought that the biggest thing that I thought, and I was probably in this camp as well at certain stages, that everyone in my team is as driven as me to finish on a high, when most are acting or just wishing the year would end and hope that something will change in 2026. And I think they're the mistakes that lots of people sort of have in that sort of leadership position, that they believe that everyone is as driven as them to do more, etc., etc. When in actual fact, they're not. Especially if they've had a hard year, they just want this year to end. So it's all about motivation, and it's about training and developing new ideas, I think, to get people moving forward rather than just doing the same old standard thing that they have been doing all year, and that's been failing for them. I think we've got to change those type of things.
Yeah, I agree. I agree.
So here's a I'm going to challenge myself at the end of this question as well. Okay, so here we go. So, what's the most counterintuitive strategy you've seen work for closing deals when clients say we're waiting until next year's budget to kick in? We have no budget.
Used to do this all the time, mainly works on perm, less so on contract. When we wanted December starters, and the client would say, we'll wait till next year. We can get her in for next year or him in for next year because of budget, for that same reason. We used to say, if there's no way of overcoming that completely, our final market was, I'll tell you what, we'll invoice you for the rest of December, the amount they would work in December if they'll start early, so they can get to the Christmas party, so that they can be culturally aligned in the business. If it's a 10K fee, we'll invoice you 1.5K in December, and we'll invoice you the 8.5K in January, or whenever whatever was appropriate, just to break it down in the client's mind's eye that we can also be flexible on budget. We've done it as well where we've started the person in the month and invoiced them in the next month. Any way to be flexible if we think, and the client's demonstrated it's a genuine objection. Because particularly for the end of the year, you want people working in December because that's when a lot of the cultural stuff happens. And I haven't got the stats like you had here, but we've had stats in the past where it showed that people who engage with in the company parties and all the things that go on in December are more likely to stay if they join in December than if they join in January. So we would say that to the client and say, come on, we'll help work in a counterintuitive way to your question.
So you just went quiet there at the end, Dave. So I'm not sure whether you cut out or not, but I had a very similar answer. I'm not sure whether it is counterintuitive, but I think very few consultants actually do this. Actually sitting down with your client and explaining the candidate mentality at the end of the year. And your conversation there is absolutely right. Is that, if you invite them to the Christmas dues, if you invite them for the end of year sort of performance reviews, etc., and they're moving into that, then all of a sudden they feel part of that company, and therefore stepping across the threshold is a lot easier. If they have a really good Christmas party in the company that they're already staying at, and all new targets come out, etc., all of a sudden the mentality is, I'm going to stay, I might stay, etc.,
Yeah.
So I was a bit more gung ho, should I say, than you were. I would say, so why don't I invoice in December? But rather than you have 30-day payment terms, I'll give you 45-day payment terms.
Yeah, quite cool.
And to do it that way. But rather than invoicing on start when they start, I'm going to invoice when they accept the offer. And part of that offer acceptance then would be that counterintuitive, let's manage you through this process, let's invite them to all these dues, etc. But also what I talked about when we start to look at those stats is I want to not scare the client, but make the client aware of what the candidate mentality is like. So if those stats are actually right, if I've offered somebody then I should really be keeping number 2 candidate and number 3 candidate who's been in the process engaged as well. Now, if they are not right for the job, then should I be thinking about talking to the client and saying, do you want me to find more CVs? Because looking at the stats at the moment, you've got a 25 or 22% chance of this candidate not turning up. If we look at the stat from 2022, that's 46%, sorry, not 44%. That's a huge percentage chance that this candidate might drop out. And so I've got to change the client's mentality as well, that if we're going to wait, and that means you need to put the paperwork across today. You need to put the paperwork out to the candidate today. Let's get the candidate resigned. Let's the candidate come into your deals, etc., and do very different things rather than let it creep into January and then asking the candidate to resign. So I think it's about getting into the candidate mentality and psychology of what the candidates go through rather than saying, let's wait. So I think, to me, that's counterintuitive to try drag money backwards. Okay. But I think at this stage, you have to make sure that that budget kicks in. Now, we're talking about just December, but you think about people who are now pushing that forward and saying, oh, I'm not going to recruit until this month, or I'm not going to recruit till then. If you think about that now, think about we're at the end of September. Average recruitment life cycle at the moment is 6 weeks. So if we put the person through recruitment life cycle, that's the end of this, October. We then start to think 4 weeks notice, that's the end of November. No one's going to resign unless they've got everything lined up, properly lined up at the end of November, because December is that sort of weirdo, strange month. So you've got to start to think to your clients now, let's do those things now. But it's the same if they want to recruit in in January, we need to do the same things. If they want to recruit in March, we should be doing that now. So the counterintuitive is let's wait until the new year. No, let's go now. And it's explain to the client why we should be doing that. I think is the big thing that we should be doing and driving that.
I think there's one truism. There's lots of truisms. One of the things that I've always hung on to is that we have a sales process in running our companies. We have a way we do things, but we forget that clients have a buying process. And often what we're trying to do is put our sales process over the top of whatever their buying process is. Whereas if you have the conversation you just said with a client, you align yourself a bit more to how they'll buy, rather than you've got to get it all done, you've got to get it all done, you've got to get it all done by December. You can actually have a process that says, well, we'll align to the client's buying process.
But that again goes back to what we talked about last week about how we align ourselves with the client and what we do with the client when we align ourselves with the client and align ourselves with the candidate marketplace. So if we align ourselves with the client, remember our client is the expert on what that client does.
Yes.
We're the expert on recruitment.
And on the market and on the trends and
So if we're actually giving factual evidence to the client about what happens, because if that role that needs to be placed in January, we've done the interviews now, but we're not going to wait until November, January until that candidate accepts. What happens if that candidate doesn't accept? What happens then to their timescales, their projects, etc.? How much pressure are you going to put on that project? Because that might be cash and business critical. And therefore, the client's got to understand that there is a cycle and mentality in our candidates that is happening constantly, that if not addressed, will massively affect their productivity and capability and capacity to deliver the projects, whether it be internal or external, at that time. And I think we've got to understand that our clients don't see that because they aren't involved in the recruitment market, they're involved in their market. And therefore that alignment and how you trust each other to give the right information and the right opportunity to each other is really important. And I think, again, we tend to forget that because we know it and we think that they do know it, or they just don't want to know it because they don't trust us to have that conversation with them.
Yeah.
Here's the question that I was dying to write and then thought, no, I'm going to chicken out of it. And then I thought, no, I'm actually going to push it out there and see what happens. Okay. So how do you identify which consultants are about to or already have mentally checked out in November and December? And what's your intervention strategy before they tank the team's performance?
To be fair, Howard, I've not often seen consultants mentally checking out in November. I've definitely seen them checking out as we get into Christmas. But November they're still going for it, and I think the answer comes back to the answer to the first question. If they're motivated to perform, and the performance time is the end of January or the middle of January, then they can't afford to check out. They've got to keep working. And so mentally, there's a much better engagement if you keep them performing over the next 3 months or the next 3.5 months to get the big push through to January. So have your incentives, whether they're desk incentives, team incentives, company incentives, have them aligned over the December period and into January. And also it comes back down to good coaching and good one-to-one management. If you're asking your desk consultants the right questions about their motivation, what their plans are, if you know what their KPIs are, and you're getting feedback, you can see if they are checking out, and you can pick them up on it and remind them why it's important.
I'm going to go back to my Adecco days and computer people days, and I'm sure Rob, who's on this call as well, will probably remember this. I was a massive stick in the mud about this. I hated our annual performance and our big winners competitions because they'd say, right, we're going to take the top 10 from each individual business and several other people away on some big winners trip, whether it be Mauritius, Vegas, what have you, etc., etc., etc. And my comment was all the time is that you think that these trips are really motivational to the whole of the staff. Okay. But if you're only taking the top 10 or the top 20, you've got a staff of 400, 500, 600. Okay. Then most of these people have checked out heavily by halfway through the year.
If they don't think they can hit it.
Don't think they can hit it. So they've checked out of that competition. So when you start to get towards the end of the year, there's only about 10 to 15% of the people in the business that are driving to hit those targets because they feel that they can get into that top 10 or whatever it be. And they make a point of driving themselves really hard and talking about it. The businesses keep pushing out, look at the leader chart, look at this, look at this, look at this, look at this. And what that does, it pushes in the face of everybody else who's not achieved that. And there's a bit of resentment starts. I used to see that resentment start building up because it would be, we never had the chance. The same people go every year, etc., etc., etc. So the first thing I'd start to do is stop doing those targets so they finish at the end of December. Put them at another point in the year.
Yeah, okay? That's right. That's right.
And drive that from there. The other thing that I started to look at was two things. I'd start to look at data. And data would tell me what the average trend of performance would be of every single consultant. And as soon as I start to see that trend drop, I start to see they've checked out a little bit. So again, it's informing the managers what trends are actually happening in the business. And the thing that I used to work on, obviously, when we were sort of talking early 2000s, etc., trend analysis and data analysis wasn't that heavy and much. Okay, it was watching people's body language. And I would talk to consultants, I would talk to managers that might have checked out, and you could see they're telling you one thing, but their body language was telling you something completely different. And it was about pushing it and then probing and finding. And to me, then it wasn't about going back and saying you've just got to work harder and harder and harder. It was about restructuring. And my thought process was this, if we're not going to hit our 2025 target, how do we then change the emphasis from hitting the target for 225 to the start figure in 226? Can we grow that start figure? So your conversation about moving the goalpost from the end of December to the middle of January was, where do we start? Where do we start on the number of contractors out? Where do we start on perm? Invoices that are going to be billed in that month and placements made in that month, because we know if we make a placement today, the invoice might not go out until November, December, January, February, whether it be based on notice period. So all the time I was looking at things that would ignite their passion to keep them going away. So I tried to remove the targeted type of performance where we knew they weren't going to hit that performance, and change the emphasis so they could start to have something to drive and move for. And the big corporate targets, and we always say that, bonus, etc., drives behavior, and it does. But it drives behaviors in two ways. If you're going to achieve it, it drives you to achieve more. But if you're going to miss it, it makes people shy away. So I think we've got to start to think about how we drive that and how we work towards that towards the end of the year, because I think people mentally check out, and sometimes we don't see it, even though they might be hitting 100% of their target, but they are miles away from hitting the big targets or the big commissions, etc. They may just mentally check out at that point. And that's the other side. If we're not incentivizing in the right way, and I'll use when I was a sales consultant, this is what they did. They said you earn 20% of everything you build. It's a great target. And then they said, as soon as you've hit your annual target, you will then earn 25% of everything that you build. So my mentality was to hit my target by September. Then I could have a whole quarter of 25%, which meant that I drove towards the end of the year really heavily to hit my target and drive my target from there. So sometimes it's those type of incentives, but I do think the big corporate incentives, etc., I think that destroys motivation in most of the team, and that then the people that are trying to hit that rub salts into the wound, and it creates a divide. And I think we've got to avoid that as much as humanly possible.
Best we can. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. Here's a killer question for us, and I thought I'd put this in just again. I was writing some of the questions on the way back from an event I was at last week, so I started to sort of do this on the train because I was bored. So, if you could only track 3 metrics during Q4 to predict your January performance, which 3 would you choose and why?
Well, there are the obvious ones like CVs out and interviews and all of that. So I was trying to think away from the obvious. I would ask, if you could measure this, ask your clients how long it takes them to make a decision. So client decision time. So you may have 10 clients, and often they don't get asked that. So if we send you candidates in November, to your point, if we send you candidates in November, how long will it be before you make a decision? And they can say, oh, well, it depends whether they're good candidates and all of that stuff. But ask them, what about the last 10 people you hired? Yeah. So find out how long it's going to take. This is an obvious one because we're talking about end of the year, but who needs to be involved in the decision? And are they there? Yeah, that may not be a direct KPI, but you need that information to find out to make your KPIs work. Because I've seen so often interviews take place. Yeah, we like the person. You go back to get the decision. Oh, they're off on holiday, or they're off away, or you need to know all that information. And the third one, of course, as well, is candidate availability. We always ask what else have you got on, and how fast can you move, and all of that sort of stuff. But you need to know, for the whole bank of people you've got for that job, you need to know what their availability is coming into November and December. You align that with the KPIs that you would normally be measured on, and then you've covered the full gamut of getting deals closed in this year.
Interesting. So I put these 3 down as a driver for the start of the year. So I put client visits to both new and old clients, and track what comes from the meeting. So it wasn't the number of client visits, it was every meeting should have a goal before you attend the meeting. So what's that goal that you've got? And I find lots of meetings are booked at this time of year, especially by those people who have checked out, because they can hide because they're out at a client meeting. Lots of people book meetings just to hit a KPI. So I think to track your outcomes, it's really important. So if you're constantly setting goals for it, if you go to that client, when you come back, I want a report of what you've got. What's the goals you're trying to get out from that meeting? What do you want? In other words, why are you going on that meeting? So we do that. The other one was the quality of jobs worked. So I'd look at my actual placement ratios percentage, and then I'd start to say to people, right, we're going to stop working jobs under a certain level that we never place. And this sort of changes people's habits. and we start to change the habit. Let's not get desperate just to work roles just because was at the end of the year if we're not going to place them. And again, people who've checked out love to get a role on that we've got no chance of placing, but I'm going to try place that candidate, etc., etc., etc. So what you were saying about how long is it to make a decision before that role can get through, how long does it take to fill that role? What's the chance of that? So use your data to measure those roles, okay, and then only work the roles that you've got 80% plus chance of filling. That means they've got to spend the rest of the time, rather than working poorly qualified roles, doing business development, either into new clients or into existing clients, but they're not hiding behind a poor pipeline that they've probably got less. I think when I was working at CP and in my own business, I worked out we averaged, on average, the pipeline that your consultants gave you, we only filled 25% of that pipeline.
Right.
So if we're only filling 25% of the pipeline, 75% of that time, what can we do with that 75% of the time if we weren't trying to fill roles that we haven't got 75% chance of filling? So we started to move that. And the other one that I started to do with in my own business and with clients now is I started to measure my forward pipeline. So I would create a calendar and say, right, here's my calendar. Okay, so I'm going to start in October, go all the way through the year back to September. Okay, so every time we speak to a client, every time we speak to a business, every time we go out and see a client meeting, we should be trying to find out what projects they're on, what business they're tendering for, what things are going to affect their staffing over the next 3, 6, 12 months. And so when I come back in, I should start to write in November, client A in November is going to need this type of person. They're going to need this person in March next year. And what I start to do is then I start to build a pipeline of what's actually happening in the future. Now, if I know that, yeah, we've got a 25% fill rate, I know then to get my 2 placements, I need at least 10 clients to make those placements. So I can start to see, have I got a pipeline that's actually growing and actually developing, rather than asking about what's happening today. Oh, nothing. We're going to go in January when we get budget, etc. Okay, I'll give you a call in December. You know, all this sort of stuff. We're actually starting to talk about what the clients are doing, talk about their projects, their tenders, what are they doing, what's going to affect their staffing levels over the next 3, 6, 12 months. That's the information that we can start to build. Now, obviously, not all of those roles will come off in the future, but a high percentage of them will. And that's the bit you can start to see when you look further ahead, what months are barren, what months are really looking buoyant, because you can see the consistency or inconsistency of your business development strategy and how it's working. So constantly I wanted to look what was going forward rather than look at what's just happening today. And to me, if I want to really hit January, I've got to start to think, how many temps have I got out on not Jan the 1st, but maybe Jan the 12th? How many invoices have I got written already, but how many good jobs have I got on a perm level that's likely to drop in January? Yeah. How many client meetings have I got? All of those sorts of things I start to measure and develop. How many clients have told me they're going to recruit in January? Because that's going to have potential opportunity for temp, perm, and contract, okay? But that's going to affect my billings in January, February, March, etc. So all the time I was trying to look 2 steps forward rather than looking at my feet now and going 2 steps backwards. I can't remember, I can't work out if this is a similar question to question 1 or not, but let's throw it in there anyway. Hiring managers love to say at this time, let's revisit this in the new year. Give me a response that would help them change their mind and why they should work with you now.
Well, apart from the obvious question, why do you say that? And then unpacking that, I think our job as recruiters is to advise our clients of the market movements. So in the same way, how you started this webinar with some excellent stats, we will have stats and trends about what's happening in the local market about to give to those clients. So, Mr. Client, Mrs. Client, if you're trying to take these people on board, can I just say that last year, and then tell them a story. You know, last year we had exactly the same situation with another client. They paused, they lost the candidate, it took them to February to get them. So as long as you can intelligently tell your clients what's going on in the market or what's going on with those particular skills, cybersecurities, teachers, nurses, whatever it is that your recruitment company is working in, whatever sector, there'll be trends that you will have access to that clients won't. And if they're big clients and they've got their own TA team and they're still using you, then they're obviously using you because the TA team isn't doing perhaps what it should be doing. So again, you can offer advice, you can offer guidance, you can tell them things about what's going on. And I always find it's best if you can tell them with a story of an exact situation that happened for you with a candidate that can win them over. Not every time, of course, but sometimes, and it will close the gap.
You know, it's interesting. You put one word into that conversation that sort of set my mind sort of flowing very quickly. Story.
Yeah.
The best recruiters I've come across, and I want them to take this in the right way, are the people who can tell the best stories.
Yeah.
And you think about anybody that you meet anywhere, etc. They're really great people, but it's the stories that they tell. It's the conversations that you have with them. It's about the interest that they talk about. So it's about having the right story to tell your client that will help change their mind. So understanding your client is really important, and then having the right story that benefits them as well as you, so they can see what's happening. And it's those stories that make things more believable. It's those stories that make things actually come to light. And I think that's the bit where it's about how you overcome that objection, is about having the right story to tell them to help them. And going back to last year, going back to the year before, I was working with clients last year. This is what happened. They said the same thing last year. This is what they did. You know, have the negative side, have the positive side, and all the different things, the different connotations that go with that. But make it into a story. Make it something that they're interested to listen to, and in something that they can thrive off and build off, because it's the stories that people start to believe and people start to make. So I think that single word in your answer there, Dave, gives me a better answer to what I was saying. We should look at the strategy and train our consultants to overcome that objection. But to overcome that objection, it's about having the right stories to tell your clients.
And also, because it's your story, it's completely believable.
Yeah.
Because you know the candidate's name, you know the client's name, if you want to reveal that, but it's so believable, and you'll add your own flavour to it, so it doesn't sound like you're reading from a training manual. This is what happened to me. Don't let that happen to you.
I gave that stat on Monday about leavers, etc., to one of my clients on one of a mentoring session I was doing with one of my clients, and he posted it out yesterday.
Okay. Yeah.
And someone came back and said, "I'd like to see where all this data's come from." So I've answered the question, because he tagged me in saying, "I got this from Howard Greenwood." So I've answered the question and said, "Gartner." I said, "I can't find the stat, but I'll go back to that person and find out where he's got that stat from. But this is the Gartner report." To which he then questioned the Gartner report. And I said, "Well, it's all online. It's all on Google. Why don't you Google it and find it and see what's going on?"
Yeah.
Because that's the story. That's the data. That's the stats. The stats don't lie. It's how you weave it into that story, whether people think it's believable. However, he was one person of a thread of about 40 people who'd answered that saying, "Oh my God, how do we change this? How do we do this? How do we do that?" He was one person that had looked at, I want a bit more proof to do that. Now, whether he's doing that so he can get a better story, which I hope he's trying to do, but it's about challenging it. So your clients are going to challenge those things. To make your story believable, you have to have hard facts to sit behind that story to do that. But so...
And we do live in a world, Howard, where people, particularly leaders, and without getting political, we saw Trump's speech yesterday, they just make stuff up. There's no validity. There's no truth. There's not even a backstory to the stats that people make up. So your chap there was right to question.
I've got no problem with the question,
because then he can use it in the story that he will articulate when he says, "Actually, this is a stat that I read. I checked it out. It turns out to be valid," and it adds even more impact and weight to what you're saying.
But I'm not taking paracetamol ever again.
No, and also I've decided I'm not going to get pregnant. So I think I'm safe.
Indeed. Right. Next question then. So again, this is a question that I've pondered myself when leading big teams. What's the difference between how average recruiters and the top 10% performers structure their final quarter? So specifically in terms of daily activity and mindset, etc., what is the difference?
The best recruiters that I've ever had the pleasure of working with or managing, uh, you know what, they don't even notice the final quarter. They are just performance machines. They just keep going. The final quarter, and then there's another quarter, or there's another half year. Yes, there's an incentive to hit, and obviously want to hit that. But I think they're aligned with the company's purpose. They have their own personal motivation as well as the company's incentives. And that just drives them, and they just keep going. The really good 10%, they just keep motoring and they enjoy the job. Yeah, so I think it's that bit of recruitment can be tough. Placing people can be hard. You know, people drop out. You don't get the same. You may be placing a team of contractors of 8 or 9, and you get 7 of them. That's the job. But the ones that are elite are the ones that seem to enjoy it more than others. The ones that just keep doing the same things the right way. And they're the ones that seem to get through the end of the year and onto the next year. And they kind of Christmas sometimes gets in the way of their performance. You know, they're not worried about it. They're moving on. They've got a day plan for December. They've got a day plan for January. They know what the clients are doing. They're hooked into their clients. And good performance. They act like that. So if you're running a team where you've got 10% of your performers are good, 70% are okay, and okay can still drive your team. It's working with the 20% that are left to get them back on track, but also not forgetting that sometimes the 10%, the good ones, can do even better. So don't give up on that, because sometimes an extra bit more squeezed out the top is better than trying to get the lower performers to upgrade.
So I alluded to this earlier on. I think the average recruiter sees the end of the year as a full stop. And it's a time to wind down and reset. And I said, I think the top 10% of recruiters, as you said there, they don't see the end of the year. They just see it as one destination on their journey. And it's a tricky destination, therefore it might need special attention, or you might get derailed from your journey. Okay. So I think they battle to make it through that destination and beyond, and they want to try and make it as lucrative as possible. So therefore, it's not a full stop. It's not about getting off the train and having a snowball fight. It's about stoking up the fire, getting the snowplow attachment on the front, full steam ahead, and drive forward. And I think that's the difference in the mentality, is that they don't see it as an end. They don't see it as a full stop. They see it as it's just another destination as the part of the journey that I've got to go through. It's just another thing that I've got to pass to get to where I want to be. And if you think about what we do when we talk to clients about setting, 3-year business plans, it's not a 3-year business plan. It's 90 days in those 3 years is what we're going to do. But at the end of those 3 years, the business plan doesn't stop. The business plan continues. We keep that. We keep building the 3 year, and we never should get to the end of 3 years because we keep adding to the plan, keep building the plan, keep pushing that plan further forward. So it's about moving forward all the time. And I think good businesses see that, where lots of businesses have a full stop at the end of their plan, and when they get there, it's what do we do now? We've arrived. And I think we have the same thing with Christmas all the time. So final question. Okay, and again, this is one of the sort of I put in just as an interesting thing. If we got a call today and we had to rebuild a recruitment team's Q4 strategy from scratch with just 6 weeks left, let's say, to the end of the year, what would be your first 3 moves?
First move would be to break the 6 weeks down into 3 lots of 2 weeks, or even 2 lots of 3 weeks, because 6 weeks is still quite a long time. That first bit of those 6 weeks would be, right, what have we got to do? Breaking it down to what we need to do, when we need to do it by, how we're going to do it. Put a little incentive in to get us over the 6 or 7 weeks, whatever that time frame is. The second time part of that will be about driving that performance, and the third one will be about building on what you've already done. So don't even see it as 6 weeks. For me, when you've got a target over a time like 6 weeks, the short, sharp focus of the week or the 2 weeks is much better than the 6 week focus, because 6 weeks is not a long time. 30 days is not a long time for the end of the year. So I'd break it down as fast as I could. And some of the measurables that you said earlier on, that we both said earlier on, they're the ones that would go into that. And whatever the number is, obviously you want to exceed it. So you put a 10% figure on the top, because they've got to hit that number. It's the old line that the target is the floor you stand on, not the ceiling that you aim for. Yeah, you've got to hit your target. So we want that a little bit more, because your target keeps you in your job. Hitting your target keeps you in your job.
See, I remember sort of picking clients or picking offices up and picking people up at this stage and sort of say, right, let's turn the motivation round in the next 6 weeks. And to me, it was instantly going into your existing client base. Right, what do we know? Let's properly get out there. So the first week would be all about your existing client base. The second week would then be all about your lapsed client base. And so once we understand our lapsed and our existing client base, then it's about marketing the most placeable candidates into those clients. And if we can then start to create traction from that, then we start to move forward, because that's the simplest way to make a deal from there. But once we start to understand what our clients want and we look at what the most valuable opportunity is to us, then we look at all the surrounding opportunities that may produce. So I always think, if my most placeable candidate is a candidate in, I don't know, information technology, and they're providing information technology, then I should be trying to find every single client that is within a certain mile radius that has that type of thing. Now can I start to take my candidates to that? And this is the conversation that we've talked about for years. You could have 15 jobs on. If you haven't got a candidate to fill those 15 jobs, then those 15 jobs are worth zero in your bank. Okay. You could have one candidate that could fill all of those 15 jobs. That candidate is now worth an awful lot of money to you. But if you've got 15 candidates that can fill those 15 jobs, now that's worth 15 times as much money to you. So to me, it was about understanding what your clients want that are buying right now, understanding what your lapsed client wants, get out and meet those, and then start to build a marketplace of candidates that you can take to those people to start to whet their appetite and hopefully get people across the line really, really quickly. And that will lead also into the future from there. So I think there's lots of things you can do now to excite that. And then to me, then that's all about driving motivation. Once you start to see consultants motivated by what we can change now, then it helps to see what we can change further down the line and down the future from there.
Agreed.
So a really interesting conversation today. So next week, we've got another interesting webinar coming up. And next week's webinar is going to be slightly different. We're going to talk about how technology upgrades and system optimization now can help future-proof your business, not only for the end of this year, but for 2026. Now, as you probably know, Dave and I, we will first admit, from a tech point of view, we know a reasonable amount, but not as much as we should do. So next week, we're inviting a guy called Sai Borg into the business, okay, to have a conversation about that. He works with lots of recruitment agencies about how to maximize their business processes using the technology that they have now. So we're not talking about adding new technology into your business, etc. We're going to be talking about how we optimize your systems to ensure that you can use them properly and get more money from those processes and work from there. So it'd be a really interesting conversation next week. So Dave, thanks for your time today. Ladies and gents, thanks for your time. I hope you enjoyed it, and we look forward to seeing you all again next week. Thank you very much.
Take care, everybody. Thanks. Have a good week, everybody.
Cheers, bye.